China flexing its military muscles, conducting large-scale drills in a crucial and sensitive trade route in the South China Sea with dozens of naval vessels and an aircraft carrier. This, as reports that North Korea's Kim Jong-un made a surprise visit to Beijing today. Here to discuss it, Rebecca Grant, a former Secretary of the Air Force official and president of Iris Independent Research, along with Frank Gaffney, president of the Center for Security Policy and a former Assistant Secretary of State. Frank, I think all of this stuff is interesting, even more so as this sort of trade war negotiation goes on. But what do you make of the military display we saw?
Well, I think it puts to rest the excuse that we've been hearing for the Chinese for a long time, which is that they were going to have a peaceful rise. They were, starting back in 1999 at least, Charles, engaged in what they called unrestricted warfare against the United States, using mostly financial and economic and non-kinetic techniques to try to strengthen themselves at our expense and, in fact, weaken us. What we've seen, I think, now is the increasing evidence that they are building a military prepared and capable of taking this conflict to the kinetic level. And that is a very worrying thing. As you say, the South China Sea is an incredibly important trade route. And unfortunately, they're positioning themselves in Panama and in the Caribbean and in Africa and elsewhere to engage in similar kinds of choke points against us and our vital economic and national security interests.
And of course, Rebecca, they're not being they're being pretty transparent about it now, so they must be pretty confident about where they are.
China has definitely taken a step forward. What I see is they're integrating elements of their southern fleet along with the northern fleet that includes their little ski jump aircraft carrier. They've had their H-6 bombers out flying along with their fighters. They are trying to build up to a more integrated military force. But don't forget, what they lack is combat experience. It's been more than 30 years since their little dust-up with Vietnam. This is a military that has great technology, but they're still lacking in that real combat experience. Nonetheless, we're going to have to deal with it down the road.
Frank, what do you make of Kim Jong-un maybe in this bulletproof train making this trip to Beijing? What are the ramifications of it all?
Well, conceivably, it is to seek the Chinese advice and maybe some accommodations on the kind of sanctions that the Chinese have finally begun putting on the North Koreans in anticipation of the meeting with President Trump. On the other hand, it could simply be a strategy session to how to play this operation, which I think, frankly, the Chinese have been running against us for some time. This idea that they're going to help us with North Korea, I think, has been misplaced. Right. I believe that they see this as an advantage to China, again, at our expense.
Rebecca, you mentioned these advanced weapons, the improvement for China. There's a report out, Russia and China, by the way, they say now outpacing the United States with respect to developments of those super fast missile technology, I guess is the hypersonic missiles. What's the implication of that? Because it sounds like, I know Senator Inhofe talked about it today, and it sounds like we might be at a disadvantage here.
Charles, Russia and China are not ahead of us in hypersonics, but what they are doing, even though they're behind, they're running very, very fast. China has built up a lot of infrastructure. Russia tested that missile off the MiG-31. It's not that impressive, but we know they're working in this area. And our Defense Advanced Research Project Agency has a hypersonics initiative, but we need to make sure that we've given Mr. Steve Walker over there all the funding he needs to keep America ahead in hypersonics. If he needs another wind tunnel, more testing, they've doubled the budget for our hypersonic research, but we need to do more with our great programs like the Tactical Boost Glide and the air weapons concept. Well, we got to stay ahead.
Charles, there's a dirty little secret here, and that is that we gave them that technology under a program called Skolkovo for the Russians. It's a scandal that's even bigger than Uranium-1.
All right, we got to leave it there. Love your expertise.